It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Arizona Cardinals fans, welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. We are excited to actually preview an Arizona Cardinals game today. I'm joined here with the co-host Marcos Labrada as well to talk about the Arizona Cardinals. And Marcos, we have a heck of a first game this season. But before we get started talking about the game, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just having my little camera problems, of course. I'm here. As you can see.
There, we got your back. Awesome. Oh, there he's gone again. Well, we're going to at least be able to kick it off here talking a little bit about the Arizona Cardinals news for this week. And Marcos, I think that before we get into the game, before we talk about just how the team is shaped up, there's not a lot of injuries that they're bringing into the game. We'll see. It seems like Tip Ryman is going to play, but the Cardinals chose their team captains for the year, a bit different from last year. They also are going to have game captains. Last year, Jonathan Gannon said that he picked the team captains, and this year he said that the players voted on the team captains, and there was a little bit less than there was a year ago. I don't think anyone is surprised at who the team captains are, but Marcos, what did you think at least of having Budda Baker, Kaiser White, James Conner, and quarterback Kyler Murray being the team captains? All were team captains last year as well, but there was a little bit less as far as for team captains. Part of that being because DJ Humphries is no longer an Arizona Cardinal.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of pointed out that Dennis Gardeck not being special teams captain was kind of like a miss. I also feel that way because even though the new rules are structured differently, and that means that different players are going to flourish, and these new kickoff rules and whatnot, the punt rules are still the same. And special teams is still special teams, and it's still a big part of the game as well. You can ask the San Diego Chargers when they were the number one offense and the number one defense, but they had the worst special teams, how their season went. It's still important. So the fact that that's kind of omitted, I'm not sure what direction they're going with that. I'm not sure if it's just because of the new structure. They don't know how that's going to play out. But Dennis Gardeck is still a leader out there, and he's still the barbarian. That's what we think about him. You would think about him always being all hard, but it's not new. It's not new. It didn't shock me who was chosen as the team captains, especially since this player voted and whatnot. I'm not 100% sure why there would be game day captains, because I need a little bit more clarity on what that would look like, I guess, from the coaching staff. If that means if we're going up against the Eagles, for instance, Kaiser White is already a captain, but let's say if he wasn't, would he be a captain then? Or if we were going up against a team's, if we had SMB, for example, we were going up against the Tennessee Titans. SMB just played for him last year. Hey, you're going to be the captain for today. You're going to, be the guy who's going to pretty much give us a little bit of an idea what their game plan is. So you're going to be captain for the day. But I don't understand what that looks like. Blake, I don't know. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's with how we know with the college football, they usually will have game captains as well. And sometimes that'll be chosen by the college coaches. So good example, someone at least who maybe would be a walk-on student, kind of earns and hustles his way there for the most part, is able to maybe not get a scholarship completely, but I think a lot of people would think, hey, there's a situation with a guy everyone who was familiar with the movie Rudy, how the whole thing kind of played out, at least, where he was a senior, hadn't gotten to really play, then kind of comes on into the last game of the year, at least as a senior. One of those examples, I'd be oh yeah, cool, that's boom. You get the honor of being able to be a game captain I think that there's also different times for players throughout the week. Like a great example could potentially be, let's say that James Conner at least gets a little bit nicked up. He's not going to come back in the game. Trey Benson comes in, rushes for like 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. You could then say, hey, Trey Benson, you're the team's game captain for like the following week since you stepped up in the face of adversity. I do agree that it's definitely interesting that from what Jonathan Gannon said, their way the vote stacked, there could have probably been at least more captains. I think it could have possibly been they didn't want to get to 8 captains, and that Gardeck was actually pretty close to maybe a couple of other players as well, and they just decided to kind of pare it down a bit. It's also interesting, Marcos, because we've talked about this a lot, but with both of them approaching age 30, we've got DJ Humphries and you've got he's gone now. Obviously, we talked about how Paris Johnson was going to step up and replace him. James Conner and Buda Baker, they are kind of in the last year of their respective deals as well. And that's something that's kind of interesting, at least, is you've got some of your team captains, at least for the most part, are, I would say 3 of them this year, Kyler Murray notwithstanding, is they're all some of the top leaders in the team, yet none of them have been extended yet, which is going to be really interesting to watch through, whether for a midseason extension, whether they let James Conner walk in free agency. It's part of why I think that they brought in guys like Trey Benson and Dadrian Taylor Demerson. I think what was interesting to me was, like you said, there's a very good opportunity for either a Paris Johnson and I think a Dennis Gardeck to potentially be listed in as captains. I think that the way that Jonathan Gannon seems to be shifting his approach is, hey, first year, I'm setting the culture. Here's the guys we're going to follow. Year 2, it feels like the culture is set. They're just going with the guys that they voted in, and now they're also going to have the team be voting on specific game captains. So I think that that, to me, is a good example that the culture of the Cardinals, at least right now, before week 1, is probably about as strong as it could be without actually playing any games.
Backstage. Oh, there we go.
He
Yeah,
is back.
sorry, this having this damn camera issues and whatnot. But I agree with you with well, what's going on with like there being a possibility that there might be captains that might be inserted that could be permanent captains later on. It's just I also I find that, like, I guess just like you mentioned, it goes back to the college game, but it I still don't understand it fully, like how that's going to be implemented. So I know that the permanent captains are the captains, of course. They're the main people, so they're going to be carrying the C on every single game coming in.
Mhm.
But for the game day captains, are they going to give them a uniform with the C on it for the day, or I
No,
see
they'll go
that's
out
what
for
I,
the kickoff, at least, I think is how they'll go, as far as like the team captains go to the middle field for the kickoff. And then in
oh, I
this
see.
case, they'll have 1 or 2 people go on. Good example of that, Kelvin Beachum in the, I think, Cardinals final preseason game. He was suited up because he was the emergency tackle. They didn't play him at all, but if one of those offensive tackles is going to go down or if there was another injury, he was going to fill in. He was the team's game captain, came out there for the opening coin toss. And yeah, it's going to be interesting, like you said, because at the end of the day, there's a lot that I think that people can overemphasize on, like, oh, Paris isn't a team captain. Well, at the same time, I do think a lot of people can also recognize that that is the kind of spiritual leaders on your team. It definitely is a huge difference if a team captain misses a game. Those are essentially the guys who are expected to be your stars, your playmakers, and essentially be also those guys who are not afraid to kind of comfort a player when they've made a mistake and also chew you out if you're a player who's made a mistake. That's something that I think we will be interested in watching in Cardinals as Cardinals fans. What are your thoughts on Kyler Murray? Because I know that this is one guy who has kind of gotten raked over the coals in years past. This year, he seems to have stepped up and taken on a different leadership mantle. At the same time, Daniel Jones is a captain on the New York Giants, and a lot of people would take a look at those 2 players and would say, hey, like, neither has had the success that I think their fan bases would have preferred. But there's a huge difference in between the Cardinals fans who are excited for Kyler this year and Giants fans who are like dreading
Mhm.
the Daniel Jones experience and just waiting to sometime get to next year with a different quarterback potentially. Do you think that the league is a little bit too soft on just, hey, if you're the quarterback and you're not a captain, it's kind of like a worrisome deal, so let's just go ahead and make our guy the team captain there?
Well, you're supposed to be as the quarterback, you're supposed to be the leader of the offense. So it's kind of a it's not really something that's like a given to a certain individual because you could have a quarterback coming into a season that could be like a backup, but you're not going to make him a captain because he wasn't the starter to begin with. So they're not going to make Clayton Tune the captain if Kyler Murray goes down for the rest of the season. It's just going to be whatever captains you have are going to remain the captains, and Clayton Tune would be just the quarterback taking over in a situation like that. And Kyler Murray will still be the captain before and even after if he comes back in the middle during the season. So, um, but as an offensive play caller on the field, obviously you're the leader. So in other words, leader and captain kind of go hand in hand. So when you bestow that upon a quarterback, especially if it's your guy, you're the dude you're signing long term, your franchise quarterback, no matter what the circumstances, if the guy isn't even a leader, like let's just say a vocal leader or whatnot, they need you to be that person. So they bestow that C on you to tell you, hey, you're the captain of the offense, or you're the captain of, you're a captain on the team because we need you to be the captain. We need you to be the leader out there and stuff. And it does come down to like, just like, hey, can you operate the offense and then, manage all these individuals on the field and whatnot. And I think it's kind of hilarious about like the Daniel Jones situation that like they are dreading going into the season, even with their first round pick that they have that could possibly help them out. And it kind of goes full circle that Daniel Jones throws a pick six in his own end zone while going down for a sack. And and it pretty much kind of summarizes what like the season's looking like going forward. Like, dude, like this is your fifth year and you do something that's so ill-advised like that in preseason.
Yeah,
That's
it's rough at least. Obviously people could say, "Hey, it's just preseason," and at the same time, it is like you
still a
said,
bad
Marcos.
decision.
Yeah, there's areas at least of looking at the games of being a dress rehearsal, and it's like no one wants to be able to have a dress rehearsal that turns out like that, regardless of how the regular season may go. The vibes are, I think, something that are important to a fan base coming in. I think week one can set the pace for that. And I also think that week one can be sometimes too important. So a good example a couple of years ago, you look at the Packers in one of Rodgers' MVP years get blown out by the New Orleans Saints in week one. People are like, oh, it's over. You also have a team in, I think, the Vikings that beats the Niners. Niners end up going on to, I believe, make a deep playoff run that year. And really, week one is something where, because of how different teams are stacked up in preseason, it's the first week for a lot of teams. Sometimes that this end score that you'll see for that week may not necessarily mirror what the actual team performance is going to be. Oftentimes that can be where some teams may go, hey, we're going to do what the Cardinals did. We're just going to prep like this is a typical week, start on Wednesday, so that way we can kind of get a little bit more time of getting into that same routine every single week. And there's other teams who, like, I think we joke about Andy Reid in NFL Twitter, who, if you give him a bye week to prepare, he's like almost undefeated after the bye week, and you get him in a whole off season to prepare for the week one opponent. Chiefs come out and usually are pretty strong in being able to win that week one. One of the areas I think of, if you look at last year, this is going to be something I think we can take a quick look at, Marcos. The week one scores from 2023, you're talking about obviously Chiefs open, Lions were able to get the win. That was a good harbinger for their season. Panthers was definitely a little bit more realistic. Obviously, one that you can see here, the Texans Ravens. Now, after week one, Marcos, we were looking at this as Cardinals fans going, all right, top five pick and another top five pick coming, baby. That did not turn out to be the case. You can also see how some teams, though, like the Bengals, were definitely able to like show that they had some problems. There were issues that were happening. You can see also, at least with teams like the Niners, just steamrolling over the Steelers. Cardinals kind of played the Commanders pretty close. Those are teams that picked second and fourth in the NFL draft. You can also take a look, interestingly enough, at
The Green Bay Packers
yeah,
again.
exactly.
Over the
Packers at
Bears.
least playing the Bears. Obviously, that was the Jordan Love game. That was kind of the week one game where you looked at that and went, all right, this may not be the thing in Justin Fields. They were able to put points on the board with DJ Moore, but they were not able to stop the Packers. And of course, the other one that I think that played out the largest, at least you can see, is Jets and Bills. Now remember, week 1 of the Jets, Aaron Rodgers goes down after 4 snaps. Jets defense holds. Josh Allen, I think, has 3 interceptions. Some of them actually are not on him. Some of them are. And then, of course, you have the one that, interestingly enough, really we got to see in week 2 shifted, which was the Cowboys 40 and the Giants 0. So what's fun, Marcos, is that when you take a look at this and you process year over year, you kind of want to just kind of try to remove the outliers, try to cut out the maybe fluke things that could have happened. We take a good hard look at it, you can say, hey, like, most of what we saw in week 1 is a good harbinger for the rest of the season, and there's more exceptions to some of those rules. Like, you can say, hey, look, the Rams steamrolling the Seahawks, that's pretty much what we saw. The Rams did a good job during the season. You can see the Eagles and Patriots at least there at the same. With the Arizona Cardinals, Marcos, this is, I think, a good spot for week 1 because I think Cardinals fans were looking at 3 possible doorways for the franchise to go through. You've got door number 1, which is, I think, what most people expect. Cardinals are an improved team. Bills are still a playoff team with that experience in Josh Allen. The defense for Arizona has been very worrisome for people, whereas the Bills have a bunch of new receivers, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Door number 1, Cardinals are able to play them close. It's kind of maybe a field goal decides it. Maybe they end up losing in a close match, but they look like they're a competitor this year. Door number 2 is Bills beat the Cardinals. It's not that close. Maybe Arizona tries to mount a comeback, but the game isn't as much in doubt. It would be similar to last year's games, of course, that we saw for the most part, and maybe even a game like against the Bears with Kyler Murray. And door number 3 would be the Cardinals go out and solidly beating the Bills. In order to do that, Marcos, they're going to have pretty much a full, I would say a full stack of cards, I could say. Injury report for week 1 is going to just be limited to 2 Cardinals. You've got Xavier Weaver, who did not practice. He's had an oblique that's been something that he's worked on, I believe, from that last preseason game. I would not expect him to suit up and play. Part of that, I think, is they've got a couple of kick returners already in DJ Dallas and even Amari DiMercado. And then Tip Ryman has been practicing. He's been limited with an ankle. My guess is that he will play on Sunday, but it wouldn't shock me if we did see a little bit more Elijah Higgins than perhaps the constant Tip Ryman that we expected. As far as the Bills, they're in a unique spot. Their safety, Cole Bishop, has practiced in full. They've got DeMar Hamlin, the player who, of course, everyone remembers from basically being like dead on the field and then resuscitated, at least in that one football game. You have also the Curtis Samuel, their essentially most experienced wide receiver for the most part with the Bills, is there. And Mitch Trubisky, at least limited with a knee injury. That's the backup quarterback. You're probably not going to see him. This is a pretty good setup heading into the season, Marcos. And this is part of, I think, when you talk about Jonathan Gannon and his approach, Bills came out and had a few snaps with the starters. They played some. Cardinals, they didn't play anybody who was going to be like a full-time starter outside of some of the players who would have needed the reps. They didn't even play Marvin Harrison Jr. more than one series in the preseason. And it's an interesting approach, Marcos, because as we've seen, you come into week 1, you got a clean bill of health because guys either have gone down in practice and are already going to be on IR, as we've seen with BJ Ojolari or Darius Robinson. And you can see the Bills, who have a few more guys on the injury list, but there's a good question about if they are going to be more ready from the jump because of some of those live snaps in the preseason. What are some of your thoughts here with how you think the Cardinals have handled stuff thus far? And do you think that it's a mistake by Jonathan Gannon to not give more reps to the starters in preseason?
Well, I'm thankful that Xavier Weaver wasn't Xavier Thomas because our pass rush, especially since and I got a lot of thoughts about that trade away by Cam Thomas, it really kind of devastates me. But I gotta be like happy for him because at least he's gonna go play under a Spags type of defense, which Spags is a legend out there when it comes to like defensive coordinator. So good for him on that part. But it just like it kind of further depletes our edge rushers and our defensive line and overall. So now we're kind of like top heavy when it comes to like the defensive tackle room without the obviously Darius Robinson being out there. So the defense really does worry me. I did not like the idea of not playing our starters during preseason. mostly because I wanted to get at least some snaps on the field.
Hmm.
I did hear from like a PFF podcast when they reviewed about like the Cardinals this season. They talked about how Marvin had 3 snaps, and then they were saying, "Okay, you're good to go," and that's it. And I told myself, well, then why would you even put him out there? Why would you risk him out there to be out there for like 3 snaps if you already know you're good to go with him, and you're thinking to yourself, no, we're not gonna trot you out there. All he did was ran one dummy route. He was using blocking, and on one route he was actually like getting like physically, not physically harassed, and like it was a pass interference. He was just getting manhandled on one of them, and I'm like, this is not good. This is not a good look on on the film. I would have much rather him not play to even begin with. So I can't get any assessments going with the offense. I would have loved to, because everybody's really hyped up about the offense. You see big name people like Brett Coleman out there talking about like the Cardinals offense isn't the worry on the team, it's the defense, and the defense would be something that is gonna sink or swim this Cardinals season. I agree. I agree that even though like a lot of people can say the new age era of the NFL is ran by the offense, having a top 10 offense and having a mid-tier defense, is not exactly true, because you can't get into a shootout every single game and expect your team to be successful.
Right.
Those are usually the teams that go out, if they do make the playoffs, they go out either in the first or in the second round, because defenses get tougher. And the fact that like we're kind of going with the shotgun approach with Monty, where he's just gonna sign bodies and draft like heavy in the later rounds for like the defense, and seeing what works and what doesn't. It gives so much uncertainty to this defense. We really don't know what it's gonna look like. The only thing I can tell you is it's gonna be zone heavy for the second year in a row, and it's like that for a reason. It's because we don't have the horses yet to be able to like run more man coverage schemes at this moment, from what I've seen though. But
no, totally agree.
yeah. So my I'm just so like anxious to see how that first game turns out, like the first drive, honestly, from the offense, because I really want to know if all the hype, like all these bodies, these talented Pro Bowl s type of players, if they can carry this, if they can like get into shootouts with teams, that's what I really want to see. So I'm anxious for it.
Yeah, this is a big year, I think, at least. If you're going to see Kyler Murray essentially be bringing himself out of the stratosphere of being kind of a top 12 quarterback into kind of the higher status of being kind of a consistent top 10 year over year, even a higher ceiling potentially than that, I think that you don't want to overemphasize, because this is the NFL. There's a ton of talent. And I think a lot of that is going to start with being able to see how the game plan takes advantage of some matchups. So, we've got some of the team depth charts and projected starters, at least over here. The biggest thing within you're talking about, we'll start with the Cardinals offense first. There's a couple of things that pop up here. One of them, for example, at least, is if you're going to be looking at a strength of the Cardinals and a weakness of the Bills, it's going to be the Cardinals weapons against that Bills secondary. So you're going to at least have a couple of cornerbacks in Benford and Douglas, at least, who did at least well enough last year, but it's not considered a huge strength. They also are down from where their top safeties were a year ago. You've got DeMar Hamlin's actually starting. Taylor Rapp, at least, is signed and brought in, I believe, as a free agent. And you've got them against Marvin Harrison Jr. We've seen how Michael Wilson has been able to make plays and be able to beat one-on-one coverage, or just having that big body. You've got, of course, Trey McBride, who is already kind of blossomed into a star last year, and he's looked the part of a star in training camp. And you've got Dortch in the slot. If you're going to be talking about the Cardinals with their normal kind of personnel, you're probably going to be talking about 12 personnel with Elijah Higgins on the field, even a Tip Ryman on the field. There could be a couple of other different variations that we see as well from Arizona. There could be some 13 personnel where you've got 3 tight ends who are going to be in there. And then you also got the possibility, of course, of a couple of different running backs. The biggest thing, Marcos, that stands out to me overall, at least, is the Cardinals' offensive line is, I think we would say, solid, but not that it's to a point where you can say that the offensive line is why you win games necessarily. We saw last year their run game was a big thing for keeping them in games. The passing game was holding them back. They've got a tough matchup. The Bills' defensive line has been really strong. You've got Ed Oliver, of course, who's there. They drafted AJ Epinesa early. You also have Gregory Rousseau, at least for the most part, who has actually been a pretty nice find for them. As far as I believe, he was originally I think it was originally a first round pick. Don't hold me to that.
I think so.
He was originally
projected high.
drafted in, yeah, let me double check that and make sure. Yeah, 30th overall pick. I was trying to remember if it was late first or if it was early second round after a trade back. So, yeah. And then you have, of course, Marcos on the other side for the Arizona Cardinals. They'll be going up with Paris Johnson. You're looking right now, I think, at Evan Brown as your starter at left guard. Seems to make sense. You've also got, of course, Yalt Froholt is going to be coming back, at least from that injury that he suffered earlier. You've got Will Hernandez is probably your strongest offensive lineman, at least as far as for his career and how he's been there.
Very strong.
And then you've got Jonah Williams, of course, at right tackle, which is what we've talked about some in the past. Is he's a solid run blocker. There's questions at least about in pass pro, especially maybe on third and long. The biggest thing, Marcos, in this game too, I think, is you're not going to be seeing a certain player here in the Bills linebacker core, and that is Matt Milano. He is out for the foreseeable future. And to me, the first matchup that I look at here then is going to be these linebackers against Trey McBride, because I think that for Arizona, when you're talking about where the strength of this Bills team is, it's in their front seven. It's in them working to be able to stop the run, getting pressure on the quarterback. The corners at least seem to be fine, but over the middle of the field, Marcos, that's an area where Trey McBride going up against backup linebackers and then some average safeties, that seems to me to be the biggest matchup for the Cards on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, the crazy interesting thing is, like, that's actually a good thing that Milano isn't in the game, because him and his co-hosts are actually two of the best coverage linebackers in the league, and they do protect that middle of the field really well. And of course, we spoke about this before. Kyler Murray's his T chart looks like blue in the middle. It looks like a horseshoe and whatnot. So if actually, I would try to avoid that middle of the field as much as possible against this defense, because even without Milano in there, I don't know if I want to test them over the middle as much as I want to, because for one, look at that defensive tackle room, and they're going to be taught to do what they teach every single defensive tackle group that goes up against the Cardinals and somebody that's like Kyler Murray. You're basically going to time the snap, get up high, and then try to get to time the drop of Kyler Murray. And when Kyler Murray is about to hit the back foot of his drop, put your hands up, try to make a wall, try to do something to be able to obscure that vision. So it's actually a good thing. And this is what I mentioned about Marvin Harrison Jr. being drafted. It's actually a good thing, because now you can go ahead and target somebody reliably on the outside, somebody that I would assume that has the ability to be able to high point these balls, and he's gonna have to start high pointing and fighting off these corners, because these corners are they don't look like they're any joke.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure
corners, but again, they're not like a lockdown corner, which I think is going to be helpful for the most part. I do think I wouldn't say totally disagree, but I think that what you're bringing up is a great point. If you are a one-dimensional offense and you're just having to throw the ball all the time, you're exactly right. I'm shorter quarterback, defensive line, get the hands up. The best way I think the Cardinals can at least avoid that is by running the football. If you're going to be able to run the football effectively in this game, then you all of a sudden are going to have those defensive ends and pass rushers. They're not going to be expecting the pass. They are going to be having to play their gaps, being able to play and be able to get into the run fits. And what that will do is it sets up those play action passes from under center. It sets up the quarterback bootleg, where you're able to see someone like a Kyler Murray get an easy pass off. I think that if you're correct in that the Bills are able to get the advantage over the Cardinals in the run game, that makes the Cardinals one-dimensional. I think if I was game planning here, I would say you start off with basically making sure your running and rushing attack is strong, making sure that you're actually able to keep those guys on your toes. And then I would probably say, I would target some of those guys over the middle with Trey McBride specifically to bring a DeMar Hamlin or a Taylor Rapp down into the box, because, hey, You got a strong run game that's picking up maybe 4 or 5 yards a carry. You got Trey McBride kind of picking you apart over the middle of the field. You got to bring a safety in there just to be able to stop the bleeding. And bringing that safety in, that's going to line up a Marvin Harrison Jr. to be able to
One-on-one.
get open one-on-one. If you're even going to try to cheat and keep a second safety here for the most part, we've seen Michael Wilson be at least able to get some separation as a big body. I think that's more of that diversified attack and something that, honestly, the Cardinals did not have last year because you were basically down to Hollywood Brown. You had obviously Zach Ertz started the year, but you really did not have the ability to hit some of those outside receivers for big plays that you had a year ago. You were having to just constantly hit McBride over the middle, hit Dortch out of the slot, maybe even some Dortch where he'd go out of the slot to the edges of the sideline. This is one of the areas where you're, at least for the first week, probably going to see the complete Arizona Cardinals offense, because the way the team has been built, they have the ability to win at every single level. They don't have a true, I would say, like I would talk about just your typical speedster. Like think of your Jamison Williams, or your, even people can say like a Tyreek and a Jalen Water are too complete. But you still have your Greg Dortch as a slot, and we've all seen Marvin Harrison Jr. be able to have those huge big plays deep because he's fast despite being able to be a pretty big guy. I think if there's going to be one biggest concern that I would have, Marcos, it is that the Bills are aware of what happens and that Kyler Murray is going to be under a bit too much duress in the passing game. I think that you as the Cardinals have to be able to come out and be able to show that you can pick up a couple of good yards per play, because if you do become one-dimensional, that's then where I think you could start to see, then it's up to Kyler to have to be able to bring teams back in. Then you're going to have him start throwing outside to Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. Then those safeties can get back and over there for the most part. That's going to make it tough on the quarterback.
Yeah, that's the thing we were trying to avoid, is like the one to like it's actually true about every offense, about like the run really does help when it comes to the pass, and it's the quarterback's best friend to be able to like gain the yardage and put yourself in manageable positions when you get to like second down or third down and whatnot, and not being like 2nd and 10 or 3rd and 7 or 3rd and 10. You don't want to be in these 3rd and long scenarios for any type of offense. But I wanted also to mention on that board, every single one of the offensive players on our team, like the skill position players, they're all good pass catching players. You have James Conner, who's a good pass catching like running back, and that goes for Greg Dortch, Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, and Trey McBride. So he has weapons galore when it comes to like the air attack. So I think, like I said, it's going to be, I'm anxious to see what game plan they go into and what they do. But I do think because of Drew Petzing committing to more under center action, we're going to be seeing a lot of under center action. We're going to be seeing a lot of like those bootleg where he bails out to one side of the field and everybody kind of floods to that same side. And he has his read from closest to furthest. So they were going to see a few of that. And that's something that, once again, the league hasn't been able to see consistently from like Kyler Murray, because he didn't do it under Cliff Kingsbury, but he's going to be doing it under Drew Petzing.
Absolutely. We didn't get to see it last year, and the Cardinals were able to have a solid rushing attack for the most part. I think a lot of people point to that Eagles game where the team started off a little bit weak. You saw obviously the wrong route from Michael Wilson. Maybe Kyler threw the ball a bit too far, where the Eagles were essentially leading in the first half, and then Arizona was just able to pump off run after run. One other thing I'll mention, Jonathan Gannon on his interview with the Burns and Gambo show this week on Arizona Sports said that he would expect Michael Carter to suit up for them. I don't know if it's going to be suiting up, if it's going to be simply just an inactive that's there for a practice squad elevation. It would not honestly shock me if he's elevated from the practice squad and ends up actually getting like the second most amount of carries in the game. That would be something that would be shocking to quite a few people, but I've kind of just said it before and I'll say it again, that when you're going to be looking at some of the established player makers that are out there, you've got your James Conner. Trey Benson's still a rookie as far as when it comes to pass protection and other areas. If you're going to be playing a team in the Bills on the road in a hostile environment, having that rookie play, I think, is important, but I could see them working him into the lineup more over time. And that's something I think that we can watch and see. Do Cardinals fans who are disappointed at Michael Carter being cut kind of see a little bit of a, I would say, justification about
Yeah.
him coming back? Or is it one of those places where we're like, hey, this is just the new team where it is. Carter's going to be on the practice squad as needed, and we'll see where it goes from there. One thing I'll also talk about here is now as we pivot is just the way that things line up against this Bills offense. So as far as for off-season changes, they've got quite a
Oh
few.
boy.
Last year, you had Stephon Diggs was your outside receiver. Gabe Davis was the other outside receiver. You had Mitch Morse, who was lining up for you at center. Connor McGovern actually was, I believe, at the left guard spot. Now they're able to bring in Edwards, and then you're able to see at the right guard spot, of course, is the Osiris Torrance, who was there. There have been otherwise pretty much no one as far as for the receivers who was here last year is here again as far as the wide receivers go. Matt Collins is new. You've got Keon Coleman is new. The team also has the wide receiver spot. I believe his name's Curtis Samuel is another guy at the wide receiver spot. They also signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling to be kind of that deep threat, as we saw he was last year with the Chiefs. Valdez-Scantling, he's a guy that will get open and get your huge play, and he'll also get open and drop a huge play, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think the Bills are going to run a lot of 12 personnel. They have Dalton Kincaid as a top pass catcher, very similar in terms of just that big slot over the middle. He's not the same blocker as a Trey McBride, but they do have Dawson Knox, who is a great blocker, who's able to still make some plays. The biggest thing that stands out for me here, Marcos, is you're talking about two solid tackle options with the Cardinals. I think most people could say their starting edge rushers are probably a backup edge rusher on most teams in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see how Mac Wilson ends up being slotted. And then on the outside, it's fascinating to me because you've got kind of a wide receiver 3 in Matt Collins, a guy in Keon Coleman, who, as we've seen, can make some big plays, but it's a very different caliber of prospect from a Marvin Harrison Jr. He's probably closer to, I would say, a Mike Williams, who's now with the Jets, as far as he's not going to necessarily get the most open, but with that big body and that size, he's not going to have that elite speed. But he at least has the athleticism to be able to make plays, not just in the red zone, but on the field. He's still a rookie, and that's one of the things I think that when you're talking about this Cardinals team, the biggest strength for Arizona, I think, is going to be in their safety, and I would even say probably linebacker coverage. We'll see how it goes as far as with Mac Wilson and some of the places that they're there, but I think that you're at least talking about Zaven Collins being a chess piece that he can line up as an edge, but he'll also be in coverage on some of the other players. You're also looking, of course, like you said, at some rotational guys, like Xavier Thomas is someone who's going to come in. You're talking at least about seeing how that defensive line rotation is going to look with a Dante Stills coming in. I think that the biggest thing at the end of the day, Marcos, here is that matchup that favors the Bills the most here is going to be that offensive line against the Cardinals defensive lineman. Arizona, of course, goes out and brings in Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones, but they're not impact defensive playmakers the same way we were hoping that a Darius Robinson would be. And the Bills' run game ever since last year, where you got to see, I believe his name is Joe Brady. That's where it was. Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator. Bills were a heavy rushing attack. So you can take a look at just James Cook, who's the starter by the end of the year, and his game log to end the season. After Joe Brady took over, you're talking about 67 yards per rush against Denver, which, of course, their run defense was atrocious, had 109 rushing yards. Was able to get about 73. You're talking about probably at least 4.5 yards per carry. Down the end of the stretch the following year, they played New England and Miami, but they really were taking on these depleted secondaries for the most part and didn't really need to worry as much about some of where the run was. It is a case, at least, where the Bills' offense went from being pretty inefficient and over-targeting maybe Stephon Diggs to we're not targeting Stephon Diggs at all, but hey, we're going to be winning all these games down the stretch. They finished on I think it was a 6-1 streak to finish the season after a rough start. Marcos, the biggest thing here I think for Cardinals fans is we were awful last year at stopping the run. We're assuming that the team is going to be a bit better in run stopping, But if the Bills go on and are able to run the ball effectively on the Cardinals, pick up more than 5 yards per carry no matter what, I think that it's going to be really hard for the Cardinals to win this game, because then you're going to be putting the onus on the offense and Kyler Murray to have to catch up. I think what you're going to want in this situation, Marcos, is you're going to want Arizona to hold up enough in the run game to be able to get a couple of stops, let your offense be able to take over, and then be able to kind of put you in some of the driver's seat while also keeping Josh Allen off of the field. It's going to be some running quarterbacks as well. Allen is hard to bring down. He's mobile. He does also sometimes do one of those plays where I think it's like what someone at least talked about for the most part is every once in a while, Josh Allen will have in his head and he'll think it's Josh Allen time. And he'll make this incredible throw, at least, that you're like, how in the heck did he do that? Other times he'll be going, it's Josh Allen time. And he'll just throw a ball right to an underneath linebacker. And you're like, how did he not like see that? That's one of the cases I think where in this game between the young and new wide receivers, no Stephon Diggs, and being able to at least protect the ball if you're Kyler Murray, that's where I think the game can come down to is you're going to want to see a similar script to how the Jets beat the Bills in the first game of the season last year, enforcing turnovers and then being able to put points on the board, whether that's kicking field goals or at least being able to use some of those new weapons in the end zone. I think that's the way that I would attack this team. And like you said, a lot of zone coverage, probably not going to be blitzing as many players because Josh can either run away or will just quickly be able to adjust. I think that it's going to start and end ultimately with being able to stop the run and put the Bills into these negative game script situations.
Yep, it is, and it's a tall task to ask from our defense, mostly because once again we have no idea what this first string defense is going to look like. I would hope that they would be better against the run. I would be more confident if Darius Robinson was out there taking starter snaps, because that's one of the mainstays. That one of the reasons why we even drafted him to begin with was because he was supposed to be a stout defensive end against the run. I think what was the guy that we signed, Johnson? He's supposed to be a stout run stuffer. So
Yeah.
that guy is a good pickup for the offseason, of course. We need more of those bodies there. We need I believe Mac Wilson was supposed to be pretty decent against the run. We know that God damn it, Zaven Collins, he can hold his side of the the defensive line as a edge rusher against the run. He can hold up against them. And, if we're able to make it so that and here's another fact about the Bills run a lot of shotgun formation. So we're looking at basically the Cardinals of 2000 of 2 years ago when it looks like the Bills, because they do like to run.
They run a lot of
exclusively from the shotgun. Yeah. So, and they do not, and I'm not sure if they're going to change that up with Joe Brady when he took over, but I believe that's Josh Allen's comfort zone. It's being in the shotgun. And when he needs to go empty, he will go empty or he'll go single back. But him being the field general, taking the picture, the snapshot before pre-snap, and then knowing where he's going to throw that ball post-snap. And then, of course, having that Josh Allen situation where he's oh, I see the one-on-one on the outside. That's where I'm going. And he does it, and he'll throw it anyway, and he'll either make the marvelous throw or he'll throw the pick out of just buffoonery. So the run, obviously, stop the run, number one, no matter what. Make Josh Allen throw the ball basically the higher percentage of the time. And on the Cardinal side, once again, just throw him with different looks, because we haven't been able to throw different looks at teams before with Kyler Murray as quarterback. Now we have that ability to do it, and hopefully we'll have that ability to do it throughout the entire season. So let's keep these people on their heels, and let's see this targets show out.
Absolutely is. All right, let's go into and wrap up our show today with some game predictions. Marcos, because of the way that things have lined up, the strength of this Bills team is going to probably be in their run game. While they have some young receivers, I think there's enough veterans that I think that you're going to be able to see if Josh Allen gets enough time. I think that he'll be able to get the ball to his playmakers that he has. I think we'll get to learn a lot about this Cardinals team based off of how they're going to defend the run, because if I'm the Bills, I come out, try to run it right up their gut, and then be able to recognize that having even a rushing threat like Josh Allen is going to help me out as well. But I think that the Cardinals, honestly, this is one of those, it reminds me a little bit of early 2020, where the Cardinals had gotten DeAndre Hopkins. No one's picking them to win against the Niners. They came out and kind of shocked and surprised teams by being able to pull off a win. And that started kind of that run that we saw from Arizona in 2020 and 2021 that really continued up until the team lost DeAndre Hopkins for the season. And then, of course, end of the year, the Kyler Murray injury, of course, being one of the things where the Cardinals were not able to make the playoffs. I think this will be a high scoring game. I think that the biggest thing to look for the most part is that these Cardinals are going to come out, I think, super motivated, super ready to go from Jonathan Gannon. I think that they've got enough talent now that they'll be able to put points up on the Bills. I think the question then, Marcos, is can the Cardinals go out there and win this game? Because I think your best options available for you as a Cardinals fan is you can force multiple turnovers, you make the Bills pay, you're able to probably win by 2 scores. I think that there's a little too much faith that I have in Josh Allen to be able to figure it out, plus a little lower faith in the Cardinals defense as of now to be able to get some of those stops, even with getting turnovers. I've got this at least as coin flip. I have this as a 36-34 Buffalo victory, where Buffalo kind of escapes with a field goal kick by Tyler Bass to get out of it. But part of me, honestly, Marcos, does want to just pick Arizona for the upset special here, because it does feel like this team coming into this year with all of the way that things have gone, it does feel a little bit different. Like the Cardinals are on the rise and the Bills are potentially fading a little bit from that powerhouse that they've been over the last few years.
I agree. And even though I'm going to be realistic about the prediction, I'm kind of doing it in a way where I'm like, please prove me wrong. Like, let me be wrong this, because I like being wrong when it comes to like the Cardinals winning, because I was going to say 30, it's going to be 33-30, and I think it would be the Buffalo Bills over the Cardinals, but I'm doing that in a way of like, yeah, I think that's a realistic expectation, but at the same time, I'm doing it also because I want them to prove me wrong and be like, hey, like I say, we pulled that sneaky first win of the season, and then we are getting a lot of hype around this team, especially going into the season. So that would just throw it over the hill, and like a lot of national media would be talking about the Cardinals at that point.
Absolutely. What's your game prediction for the final score, if you have one?
It's 33-30 Bills over Cardinals.
All right, so very close, at least for the most part, at least separated by 3 points. Now, Marcos, watch us go and pick against the Cardinals, and they go out and win by 2 touchdowns over the Bills or something like that. Just because I've told people
There
before,
you
a
go.
lot of times when I pick against the team, at least for the most part, a lot of times they'll end up sounding a way to surprise me. That will be it here for us with the Redbird Reboot podcast. Marcos, if you want to shout out at least where some of our viewers, and for those on the podcast side, listeners, are able to find you and your content, and update obviously for our fans who are there, not at the Revenge of the Birds anymore, at least for the most part. Got some other plans I'll be talking about at least sometime in the future, but we will at least also be having our YouTube channel is where we're going to build a lot of our audience. So if you are a podcast viewer, want to be able to comment, talk on the show some, be able to participate, you can follow us there at the Redbird Reboot podcast for Arizona Cardinals fans. Marcos, how about you and your ex Twitter feed, sir?
It's an app Pancake Soul. You can find me on X, and also, as mentioned, Redbird Reboot is on YouTube. You can find our podcast there, past podcasts, and of course every single one that we're uploading. Always can drop in to look at the comments if you guys are there, and that's where we can interact. So that's basically where you can find us.
That'll be great, at least for the most part. Make sure you're following us on X and well at Redbird Reboot. All of our shows will be posted there as well. Marcos, Cardinals off season is done. Cardinals reboot of their franchise is just beginning. We'll be able to talk about next week with an actual NFL score update, as week 1 will kick off officially in the National Football League, as well as this Arizona Cardinals team, which we are anticipating is going to hopefully be a step up from the team we've been watching for probably ever since the late 2021. That's been the reboot, and guess what? It's time for us to log off. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the NFL kickoff, folks.
Have a great day.